Hey, this is a catch-up video for the movie I saw yesterday. And I kind of like the fact that I had a day to really sit on this film and ponder it, if you will, because it's one that deserves a lot of kind of thinking about, as opposed to me just jumping into this and giving you my first impressions. It wouldn't be as interesting, I think, because now I'm a little more composed and I really know what I think about this movie more than just my initial impressions. But before I dive in, I'd like to take a time to say that as it's been over a week since the start of this challenge, that I have some thoughts on it, and ultimately, I'm not that much of a fan of this spooktacular anymore. I think it's something that appealed to me a lot more when I was younger, mostly because there were so many famous horror films out there that I had not seen. Also, my tastes weren't as skewed. I was a bit of a pleb, if you will, so my standards weren't so unusually high to where I I had reasons to dislike anything. For the most part, I was just kind of amazed by everything I saw. Which isn't to say that I don't still look at films with a positive eye, or that I've seen anything particularly bad for this challenge, except for maybe the first Tyler Perry movie. And also, I was more scared of horror films back in the day. With the proper setup, watched them by myself with all the lights off and completely immersed in the world of the horror films I was watching, there are several movies that really terrified me. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, first time I saw Suspiria, first time I saw Halloween, A Nightmare on Elm Street, The Shining, even Paranormal Activity. I mean, today, I'm just not as scared anymore. And that's not a bad thing. Everybody grows up. I'm less concerned with paranormal entities or fear of the vampires that are coming for me, or even most serial killers as depicted fictionally on screen, because I'm aware of the tropes and the stories and the filmmaking at work. Whereas I spend more of my time worrying about real life. So I don't know. I think I will finish this challenge just to say that I've done it, but even right now, I'm taking classes, so I am kind of busy. And there are also other movies I want to see that aren't specifically horror films. So if I do want to see those and still commit to these videos, it means I basically have to double down or pick one over the other. And it's going to be the horror film every time because of these videos. I don't know. This is just what's on my mind. Who knows what I'll think by the end of this challenge, but I think it's safe to say that I won't attempt it again, assuming that I complete it. You never know. But anyway, the film I saw yesterday was a 1983 Austrian horror film called Angst. Angst is a title that perfectly applies to this film, but more accurately, translated into English, it actually means fear. And even in France, it was known as schizophrenia, so it has a lot of titles. This was a movie that is super obscure up until recently anyway. It premiered in a very limited regional rollout tour throughout Austria, Germany, and some parts of Central Europe. Most countries had banned it for its explicit violence or content that was so uncomfortable that it gave the impression of disturbing violence, even if it didn't show too much, similar to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. In the States, there are only a couple first-hand accounts of the fact that it showed in a few XXX theaters in New York City and LA and cities like that, mainly because no studio could touch it. It was just kind of dumped and nobody really talked about. And then it kind of disappeared for a long time. It was eventually thrown onto VHS in Europe only. Gaspar Noé, director of such films as Irreversible, Love, Enter the Void, I haven't seen any of those movies. But he's kind of big in the foreign circle, and he's a huge fan of this. He cites it as one of his strongest influences, and not even just just knowing a couple scenes from his movies, the influence is clear. There are a couple direct homages to this film in some of his work, similar to Darren Aronofsky lifting Satoshi Kon references and putting them into his work. Through Gaspar Noé's praise this film, I think that was the contributing factor in this getting a Blu-ray release in the early 2010s in Europe, and then it was released for the very first time on Blu-ray in the United States in 2015. So only 2 years ago was this film really discovered, and lo and behold, it's a masterpiece. Particularly in the first act, this film borders on really being genius, and it's a work of art. It's a big difference from all the other films that I've talked about for this challenge so far. The movie is about a murderer psychopath who has just been released from prison after gunning down a woman seemingly at random at the start of the film. And the film completely follows his point of view, literally, as I'll soon explain, on his journey out of prison and his thirst for blood. This film is told very realistically. There are almost no tropes. In fact, it's almost hyper-realistic, similar to movies like Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, or a lot of more recent, really gritty, disturbing dramas. There's no fantasy. This is actually based on a true story, and according to the director, much of the dialogue is taken from excerpts of real-life serial killers' confessions. Stylistically, there are a few things that make this film interesting immediately, and part of what give it such a unique feel. One is the cinematography. Very often, the camera seems to cycle around our protagonist with a disorienting steady cam feel. There are a lot of apparatus and camera equipment developed for this film that you can find in some photos online, where the actor basically had a metal ring stretching all the way around him, and the camera attached to that ring with the cinematographer behind him, so that everywhere he would walk, the camera would track his movements, and then also the cinematographer would have free range around his body. It's very inventive for the 1980s, especially for such a small production, and it works wonders. It creates this dreamlike, very disturbing feel. Like, even though this is a man who is full-fledged a psychopath, he is our protagonist, and for better or worse, we're in this for the long haul. We're following him, and we are in his world. Also, there are a couple very intriguing high crane shots that really show just how separated he is from everything around him. Another thing that makes this film unique is the inner monologue narrating throughout the movie, told from the point of view of the serial killer. We really get into the mind of why he's committing these crimes, and even though it's mostly rooted in illness, we can still understand why he does the things that he does. And ultimately, that's what makes the film compelling. Because even though, from a bystander, I would assume you are appalled by the actions that he does in this film, and there are some very disturbing, hard-to-watch scenes in this movie. It does not hold back. Even with that, you still understand in his point of mind, in his state of mind, why he commits these actions. Now, there is an extended intro scene that kind of goes into the backstory, explaining how he became the man he was up until the point where he's released from prison, where the movie really begins. Now, when I saw this film, I thought that this introduction was excellent. I thought the whole first act was near perfect, and that the intro was a great way of getting your attention, setting the status quo of this is where we are and here's what we're doing. And I thought it was great. But apparently, the director's cut of this film does not include that introduction. The director stated that he was only required to put that intro in after distributors complained that the film was too short, a meek 75 minutes, and they wanted more content in as well as more murders, thinking this was more of a like a fun horror film as opposed to a realistic, gritty, disturbing one. But he complied and he put it in. And a lot of people talking about this film really hate the introduction because they think that by explaining a lot of stuff about the main character, it kind of forces you to distance yourself a little bit, as opposed to if you start the film right as he gets out of prison. First of all, there's a bit of confusion of whether or not he'll even carry out the crimes that he's constantly talking about in voiceover, and then it becomes more of a shock when he does. And then also, because the very first thing you see and hear is his point of view and his explanation of how the world works, you kind of are forced to be in his world, as opposed to the introduction kind of putting you in the frame of mind of, okay, this is a madman, and I know everything about him, and I'm going to watch the film with that point of view. And I think it's a fair complaint. I think the introduction does kind of detract from a lot of the possible feel of the film. And I would say, after having watched it, maybe try to watch the film without the introduction and then watch the introduction later. But again, I saw the film with the introduction and I thought it was an awesome intro. So, who knows? Again, the violence is very disturbing. They don't show a lot, but it's done kind of realistically. They use real blood. There's a lot of grit to the production. The actor playing this madman is incredible. He sucks you in, and he goes all the way into the abyss of darkness. He's a stunning performance. He makes my jaw drop. And it was no surprise to find out that he also played the protagonist in the German submarine film Das Boot. So he's a very good actor, and this is an incredible performance. There are a couple nitpicks. The score, which is kind of electronic and synthy, composed by one of the members of Tangerine Dream, kind of works for the first couple instances it appears. But the third time it appears is while the character is going through a very disturbing monologue of what he plans to do next. And I feel like it's a clash of tones. Also, as far as criticisms go, I thought the slow pace in the second and third acts is kind of emotionally draining, but again, that's the point. So even if I don't enjoy it as much, I still respect it as the artistic intent. And then also, when the protagonist commits this home invasion with a family of 3 that he'll terrorize and murder over the course of the film, the characters all just seem to react a little bit too unusually. None of the characters ever really scream or try to run away. Everything kind of seems in slow motion. But again, this might have been the intention, to kind of create a disorienting effect, like things are happening so fast that nobody has any time to react. But anyway, this is a film that is very disturbing, but it often touches on genius, and it deserves to be seen.